Imagine working for years to get promoted. Late nights, extra effort, proving yourself again and again. And then finally it happens. Your boss calls you in, congratulates you, and suddenly you have a new title, more responsibility, and a bigger paycheck. For a moment, it feels like everything you worked for is finally paying off. But then something strange starts happening. A few months go by, and the job that once felt like a victory starts feeling different. The work isn't what you expected. The things that made you great at your old role suddenly don't seem to matter anymore. The problems feel unfamiliar, the confidence you once had starts slipping, and a quiet thought begins to creep in. What if I'm actually not good at this job? Now, here's the uncomfortable question most people never ask themselves. What if the promotion everyone is chasing is sometimes the exact moment their career starts going in the wrong direction? What if climbing higher doesn't always make you more successful, but instead slowly moves you into work you're not naturally built for? Because if you look closely at workplaces, something very strange happens all the time. People who were amazing at their jobs suddenly struggle after getting promoted. The best engineer becomes an overwhelmed manager. The top salesperson becomes a stressed-out team leader. Someone who used to perform brilliantly suddenly looks average or worse in their new role. And most people assume this is just bad luck, or maybe someone simply wasn't leadership material. But what if that's not the real reason? What if there's actually a hidden pattern behind this, something that quietly shapes careers in almost every company in every industry? Because psychologists studying organizations started noticing something strange decades ago. Across companies, across industries, across countries, the same pattern kept showing up again and again. Employees performed well, got promoted, performed well again, got promoted again, and eventually reached a role where everything changed. The work felt harder. The skills that once made them successful didn't seem to apply anymore. And suddenly, the person who once looked like a rising star now seemed completely out of their depth. This pattern happened so often that it eventually got a name, a rule that explains why millions of people slowly climb their way into jobs they're not actually good at. And once you understand this rule, you start seeing it everywhere. It's called the Peter Principle, and it suggests something deeply uncomfortable about the way most careers work. Because the system most people trust to reward talent and hard work might actually be doing something very different. It might be quietly pushing people toward the one role they're least suited for. From the moment most of us start our careers, we're handed a very simple formula for success. Work hard, do your job well, get promoted, then repeat the process and keep climbing. That's the story almost every workplace sells. The idea that if you perform well enough, you'll move up the ladder and life will keep getting better the higher you go. Bigger title, bigger paycheck, more respect. And on the surface, that logic seems perfectly reasonable. If someone is great at their job, promoting them feels like the obvious reward. But here's the uncomfortable twist most people never stop to think about. The ladder everyone is climbing might not actually be designed to make people more successful. In many cases, it slowly pushes people toward a job they're not built for. Because when companies decide who to promote, they're not evaluating whether someone will succeed in the next role. They're rewarding how well that person performed in the last one. Think about that for a second. You weren't promoted because you're good at the next job. You were promoted because you were good at the last one. And those two things are often completely different. Take the best engineer on a team. They're incredible at solving technical problems, writing clean code, building systems. So naturally, they get promoted to manager. But suddenly, their day isn't spent solving problems anymore. It's meetings, performance reviews, scheduling, and dealing with team conflicts. The skill that made them exceptional, their technical ability, is now barely part of the job. Or think about the top salesperson in a company. They're amazing at closing deals, building relationships, and hitting targets. So they get promoted to lead a sales team. Now their job isn't selling anymore. It's managing personalities, reviewing reports, motivating others, and sitting in strategy meetings. The work that made them great disappears, and they're expected to succeed in a completely different kind of role. And the same thing happens everywhere. The best technician becomes an executive. The best teacher becomes an administrator. The best worker becomes the boss. Step by step, promotion by promotion, people move further away from the work they were actually good at in the first place. And here's the strange part. This doesn't happen because companies are doing something wrong. It happens because the promotion system itself rewards past performance, not future fit. So over time, a pattern begins to emerge inside organizations. Employees keep getting promoted as long as they perform well, until eventually they reach a role where their skills no longer match the job. And once they reach that level, something interesting happens. The promotions stop, but the role stays. Which means step by step, promotion by promotion, people slowly climb their way into jobs they're not actually good at anymore. And if that sounds uncomfortable, it should. Because once you start looking at workplaces through this lens, you begin noticing it everywhere. But the real surprise isn't just that this happens. The real surprise is what it quietly does to people's careers, their income, and even their happiness once they reach that point. If you start looking closely at how careers unfold inside companies, a strange pattern begins to appear. Psychologists studying organizations noticed it decades ago, and once you see it, it's almost impossible to ignore. Think about the workplaces you've been a part of. The best employees, the ones who solve problems fast, produce great work, and make the team stronger, often get promoted quickly. And at first, it all seems to make sense. The company rewards competence. But then something curious starts happening as those promotions continue. The best workers eventually become average managers. The strong managers eventually become struggling executives. And the higher some people climb, the more their performance seems to decline. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. The confident employee suddenly looks unsure. The person who used to solve problems now seems overwhelmed by them. And colleagues quietly think something they rarely say out loud. They were amazing at their old job, but this role doesn't really fit them. What's fascinating is that researchers found this pattern happening everywhere. Corporations, hospitals, schools, government offices. People performing brilliantly, getting promoted again and again, until eventually they reach a position where everything changes. A job that requires a completely different set of skills than the one that got them there in the first place. That pattern eventually got a name. It's called the Peter Principle, and the idea behind it is brutally simple. People don't rise to the level of their talent, they rise to the level of their incompetence. In other words, as long as someone performs well, they keep getting promoted. If they succeed in the next role, they get promoted again, and the cycle continues. But eventually, they reach a position where their skills don't quite match what the job requires anymore. That's the level where the promotions stop, but the job doesn't. And that's where the trap appears, because suddenly the person who used to feel confident and capable is now operating in a role where the rules are different. Think about the engineer who gets promoted to manager. Before the promotion, their day revolves around solving technical problems, debugging systems, designing solutions, writing code. That's what made them valuable. But once they move into management, their day changes completely. Instead of solving problems themselves, they're sitting in meetings, handling team conflicts, managing deadlines, and dealing with office politics. The work that once made them exceptional becomes a small part of the job, or disappears entirely. The same thing happens with the top salesperson who becomes a team leader. They used to spend their time closing deals and building relationships with clients, but now they're responsible for coaching a team, reviewing performance metrics, and running strategy meetings. The work that made them successful no longer the main focus of their job. And this is exactly how the Peter Principle works. People keep moving up as long as they perform well until they reach a role that demands abilities they haven't developed yet. Once they reach that level, promotions stop, but the responsibility stays. And that means someone can spend years, sometimes decades, working in a position where the job simply doesn't match their natural strengths. But here's the part most people don't realize. The real problem isn't just competence, it's what happens to people's careers, their income, and even their happiness once they reach that point. Now imagine what this actually looks like in real life. Picture getting that promotion you worked years for. Your boss calls you in, congratulates you, tells you the company recognizes your hard work, and just like that, your title changes. Maybe your salary goes up by $10,000, maybe a little more. At first, it feels like a huge win. You tell your family, maybe celebrate with friends, and for a moment it feels like you've officially leveled up in your career. But then the job starts changing in ways no one really warned you about. Your calendar fills with meetings that didn't exist before, problems stop being technical and start becoming political. Instead of focusing on the work you're good at, you're suddenly dealing with deadlines, team conflicts, emails that never stop coming in, and decisions that follow you home at night. Your workday stretches longer, your evenings start disappearing, the responsibility doubles almost overnight. And yet when you look at the actual financial difference, it doesn't feel nearly as big as it expected. That $10,000 raise sounds exciting on paper, but after taxes take their share, the increase is smaller than it first appeared. Meanwhile, the pressure of the role has changed completely. The workload grows, the stress grows, the expectations grow, but the improvement to your lifestyle isn't always as dramatic as people imagine. And then something else quietly starts happening. When income increases, lifestyle tends to expand with it. Maybe you upgrade your apartment because you feel like you can afford it now. Maybe the car payment gets a little bigger. Maybe everyday spending rises because the new salary makes it seem manageable. Before long, the raise that once felt like a big leap forward starts blending into a more expensive lifestyle, and suddenly the financial progress doesn't feel that dramatic at all. This is where the promotion trap starts becoming real for a lot of professionals, because the job might be more stressful, the hours might be longer, the work might be further away from the skills you actually enjoy using, and yet the financial upside isn't always large enough to justify the trade-off. And the surprising part is that this doesn't just happen once, it can repeat itself again and again. Promotion after promotion, responsibility increases step by step. The title becomes more impressive, the expectations become heavier, and sometimes the gap between effort and reward quietly grows wider. That's why, after a while, some people begin to notice the pattern. They start looking around at colleagues, managers, executives, and they realize something interesting. The people who seem happiest in their careers aren't always the ones climbing the fastest. In fact, inside many organizations, some of the smartest and most experienced professionals eventually do something that surprises everyone around them. They start turning down promotions, even when everyone else is trying to climb higher. And once you see that happening, it raises a very interesting question. What do those people understand about careers that most others don't? Here's something interesting that's quietly happening inside a lot of companies today. Some of the most skilled professionals, the people everyone assumes are next in line for leadership, are actually doing something unexpected. They're turning down promotions. Now that sounds strange at first because we're taught that moving up is always the goal. If the company offers you a bigger title, more responsibility, and more pay, you're supposed to say yes. That's what success looks like. But the people who understand how careers really work start seeing things differently after a while. They begin noticing the pattern we talked about earlier. The best worker becomes a manager. The manager becomes an executive. And step by step, people move further away from the work that made them valuable in the first place. So instead of automatically climbing the ladder, these professionals start asking a very different question before accepting the next role. They ask themselves something most people never stop to think about. Will this promotion actually improve my life or just my title? Because the moment you step into management, your career path changes in ways that aren't always obvious at first. The work stops being about what you personally produce and starts becoming about what other people produce. Suddenly, the job isn't about building, creating, or solving problems anymore. It's about managing personalities, handling conflicts, sitting in meetings, making decisions, and navigating office politics. In other words, the nature of the work changes completely. And here's the part that surprises a lot of people. Once someone moves into management, going back to their old role is surprisingly rare. Something strange happens to how companies see you. Before, you were the expert, the person known for technical ability, creativity, or skill. But once you step into leadership, your identity inside the organization changes. You're now seen as a manager, a decision maker, someone responsible for people rather than the work itself. And moving back down the ladder to your previous role, that almost never happens. In many ways, promotion becomes a one-way door.
That's why you'll often see certain professionals making choices that confuse everyone else around them. A senior engineer declines the opportunity to become a manager because they genuinely enjoy solving technical problems. A doctor avoids moving into hospital administration because they want to keep practicing medicine. An experienced software developer stays an individual contributor even though leadership roles are available. On the surface, it might look like they're refusing success, but in reality, many of them have simply realized something important. Staying an expert can sometimes give them more control over their time, their work, and even their income. Highly skilled specialists are often incredibly valuable. They get paid well, they maintain freedom in how they work, and most importantly, they continue doing the type of work that made them successful in the first place. In other words, they're not rejecting ambition, they're being selective about where that ambition takes them. Because once you understand how the promotion system works, you stop chasing titles automatically. Instead, you start thinking more carefully about what each step actually does to your career and to your life. And once people begin seeing promotions through that lens, their approach to career decisions changes completely. They stop asking, "How do I move up faster?" and start asking a much more important question: what kind of career actually leads to the life I want? By the time many professionals understand all of this, they start realizing something uncomfortable about the way careers are usually approached. The Peter Principle reveals that success in one role doesn't automatically mean the next step will make your life better. In fact, sometimes the very thing that made you successful in the first place becomes almost irrelevant in the new job. The skills that helped you stand out, your technical ability, creativity, or problem solving, can suddenly take a back seat to meetings, management, and responsibilities that have very little to do with what you were actually good at. And that's when people begin to see promotions differently. Because for most of us, career success has always been defined by one simple idea: keep climbing higher, bigger title, bigger team, bigger responsibilities. But the Peter Principle quietly challenges that assumption. It suggests that climbing higher doesn't always move you closer to the work you're best at. Sometimes it moves you further away from it. And once you see that, the way you evaluate opportunities starts to change. Instead of automatically saying yes to the next promotion, experienced professionals begin using a different kind of filter before making that decision. They start asking themselves a few questions that can completely change the direction of a career. The first question is simple but powerful. Will this role actually use the skills that made me successful in the first place? Because if the new job replaces those strengths with completely different responsibilities, the promotion might not be an upgrade at all. It might just be a career pivot you never intended to make. The second question is about lifestyle. Will this promotion genuinely improve my life or just my title? Because sometimes a higher role brings more money, but also more stress, longer hours, and less control over your time. And if the trade-off isn't worth it, the title alone doesn't really change the quality of your life. And the third question might be the most important one. Am I pursuing this opportunity because it truly fits my strengths, or because society tells me moving up is what success looks like? Because for many people, the pressure to climb the ladder isn't really about personal goals, it's about expectations. The expectation that success must always mean going higher. But the real danger isn't failing after a promotion. Failure is obvious. The real danger is succeeding, and then slowly realizing you've moved into a role that doesn't actually fit who you are or how you work best. That's the kind of trap the Peter Principle quietly describes, and that's why the smartest career decisions aren't always about climbing higher. Sometimes they're about stepping back and asking a deeper question: where does this ladder actually lead? When you step back and look at all of this together, the Peter Principle reveals something a little uncomfortable about the way modern careers are built. Most people assume that if they keep climbing the ladder long enough, they'll eventually reach a better place, a bigger role, a bigger salary, a better life. But the principle suggests something very different. If you climb automatically, promotion after promotion, step by step, there's a good chance you'll eventually land in a role that doesn't really match your strengths anymore. Not because you aren't talented, but because the work itself has changed. The higher you go, the less the job resembles the one that made you successful in the first place. And that realization changes the way some professionals approach their careers. Instead of measuring success purely by titles, they begin focusing on something much more important: building real value. The people who build the most satisfying and resilient careers aren't always the ones obsessing over titles or hierarchy. They're the ones investing deeply in skills that make them genuinely valuable, skills that give them influence, negotiating power, and the ability to choose what kind of work they want to do. Because once you become highly valuable at something, you gain something far more powerful than a title. You gain freedom. Freedom to choose the projects you work on, freedom to shape your career path, freedom to decide what kind of work actually fits the life you want to build. And once people start thinking this way, promotions stop being the default goal. They become just one possible option among many. Instead of blindly chasing the next step up the ladder, thoughtful professionals begin asking themselves different questions. What kind of work do I actually enjoy doing? What kind of life am I trying to create outside of work? And which path will actually move me closer to that life? Because in the end, careers aren't just about status or titles. They're about how you spend your time, your energy, and the decades of your life you invest in your work. And that leads to a simple but powerful realization. Career success isn't about climbing the ladder faster than everyone else. It's about understanding which ladders are actually worth climbing. So when you step back and look at everything we've talked about, the promotion myth, the Peter Principle, the hidden trade-offs of climbing higher, it leads to a pretty uncomfortable realization. Getting promoted isn't automatically the same thing as moving forward.
Sometimes it simply moves you into a completely different kind of work. Work that might not match your strengths, your interests, or even the kind of life you actually want to build. And that's why the real question in your career isn't whether you can get promoted. Most capable professionals eventually will. If you work long enough, perform well enough, and stay in the system long enough, opportunities to move up will appear. The real question is something much deeper. It's what that promotion will actually lead to once you accept it. Because every step up the ladder changes the nature of the work you do. It changes your time, your responsibilities, the problems you deal with every day, and sometimes even the kind of person you have to become in order to succeed in that role. So the question worth asking yourself isn't just about the next opportunity sitting in front of you. It's about the direction your career is quietly taking over time. Are you chasing the next promotion or the kind of life you actually want? Because the Peter Principle suggests something a little uncomfortable about how careers unfold. If people keep climbing the ladder without thinking carefully about where each step leads, they may eventually reach a role that simply doesn't fit them anymore. Not because they stopped being talented, but because the job itself has become something completely different from the work they were great at. And that's the hidden risk of climbing blindly. The higher you go without questioning the path, the closer you might get to the one job you're actually least suited for. And sometimes the smartest move in a career isn't climbing faster, it's pausing long enough to ask yourself one simple question: where does this ladder actually lead? Before you go, I'm actually really curious about something. After watching this, did it change the way you think about promotions even a little bit? Because most of us grow up believing the same thing: work hard, move up, get promoted, repeat. That's the path everyone tells us to follow. But once you start looking at careers through the lens of the Peter Principle, it kind of makes you stop and rethink a few things. So I'd genuinely like to know what you think. Did this video make you look at promotions differently? Or have you already seen this happen in your own workplace? Let me know down in the comments. I read them, and I'd love to hear your experiences. And if this video gave you a new perspective or helped you think about your career in a different way, it would really help the channel if you hit the like button. That just tells YouTube to show the video to more people who might find it useful too. And if you enjoy these kinds of conversations about careers, money, and the hidden rules most people never talk about, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next one.